Sorry, man. All right, okay. Man. Did y'all have fun? Oh, gosh, you guys are hilarious. I love y'all so much. Um, Man, oh, thank you, baby. Appreciate you, bro. Um, if you got a Bible, we're going to be in Daniel chapter 10, 11, and 12. Daniel 10, 11, and 12 today. We've been studying through this for about 2.5 months now, and I have a ton of content that we got to just kind of jump right into. And so this book has been so good for us as a church, as I've already mentioned. Daniel is a historical document written about 2,600 years ago, outlining the life and story and ministry of a young man who grew to be an old man who was basically sent to the Babylonian Empire during a very formidable period of time in Israel's history, where we get a glimpse of, I guess, really some enemy tactics that have always existed, right? And so from the beginning of his writings, we are able to see that over the course of 2,600 years, not a lot has changed, right? God's people are still engaged in the same battles, the same enemy who's still waging the same war with the same tactics and the same strategies that has always existed against God's people. And that battle can be very clear to the eyes. It can be very easy to see. You see it in the evils that we learn about on the news, right? You see it when you watch Netflix documentaries and learn about drug cartels and human trafficking and sex cults. And you see it when you see corrupt governments and wars and embarrassing presidential debates. And you see it when you hear about religious cover-ups and legalistic fundamentalistic movements. It's everywhere. When churches split and dogmatic religious leaders get abrasive. And I mean, it's just, there is a war that is clear to the eyes. And some of this battle is easy to identify because it's so clear, and some of it is difficult to see. But what we're going to see today is there's an element of this battle that is, in a lot of ways, what I'll call other dimensional. As the Bible describes, it describes this cosmic spiritual war that exists between God's people, God's kingdom, and an opposing kingdom. And it exists in the invisible realm. And a lot of times people don't know what to do with that. And although it can seem kind of mystical to us and as God's image bearers, and that is true, where all of humanity is created in the image and likeness of God, and being God's image bearers and being created for a world that isn't necessarily of this world, there is this innate sense of some sort of other dimensional existence that we tend to be drawn to. We don't know how to phrase it or talk about it really, but we're drawn to it. We use terms like fate or destiny or or energy, weird energy. I just felt, the energy of that person. Like we know that there's something else out there that we can't see with our eyes. It's why we love movies like The Matrix or Interstellar, or, people could get so fanatic and weird about things like Star Wars. Have you ever met that? And Marvel, Harry Potter. I'm not against any of those things. It's just sometimes they get a little weird, right? Nobody gets that weird about like The Notebook. It's like things that you see with like your eyes. You know what I'm saying? And the reason is because there's this deep sense in our soul that there's this awareness of this other dimensional world that exists. And we're going to see some of that today in Daniel chapter 10, 11, and 12. And then to kind of give some recap, in Daniel chapter 1, we meet Daniel. He's this exiled Jewish teenager. He's been trafficked out of Israel and sent about 700 miles into the Babylonian Empire. And over the course of his 70 years that we learn about from Daniel chapter 1 through Daniel chapter 6, you see that through some very providential circumstances, he finds himself elevated to all sorts of governmental roles and positions throughout his life. And he really shouldn't be elevated to those places. He's not even from that nation. But yet God has given him a spiritual gift, a very unique spiritual gift, to be able to understand, discern, and interpret dreams. And God gives all of us spiritual gifts. And the Bible says that when the Holy Spirit comes to live inside of any believer, because they put their faith and trust in Jesus, that with the Spirit of God comes gifts. And those gifts are spiritual, supernatural. They don't make much sense, right? Meaning when you serve, it's supernatural things happen with it, right? So like for me, I have a gift of preaching. I'm not just saying that because I think I'm a good preacher. Whether or not I'm a good preacher is irrelevant. What is relevant is that when I preach, it seems as if God uses that gift to change people's lives. right? And it's just a gift. Like I can't take any credit for it, but God gives all people that have trusted in him unique gifts. And just like God gave Daniel a gift and he's given me a gift, he's giving you a gift. And that gift is manifested when you serve and you use that gift. Spiritual things happen. It's not just that you're good at something, spiritual things happen, but God also uses your gifts to humble you at times, right? And so in this case with Daniel, it's very interesting that Daniel had the ability to interpret and discern and speak to and kind of unpack people's dreams, but he himself, he would have a dream or a vision and he would not know what to do with it. He needed somebody else to interpret it for him. And so as we move to Daniel chapter 10, 11, and 12, these three chapters really make up one documented vision that Daniel has and the circumstances surrounding it and attempting to get an interpretation or understanding of what it was that this vision and dream meant. And so I will give you a little bit of kind of a synopsis of Daniel chapter 10, 11, and 12 because we don't have time to go through every single verse word by word. And so the year is 536 BC. It's been less than 3 years since King Cyrus invaded the Babylonian Empire. If you remember that in Daniel chapter 6, that happens. And so Cyrus takes over. He actually begins to allow the Jews to head back to their homeland to establish themselves as a people underneath still his reign and rule, and also going to allow them to rebuild the temple that was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar years earlier. However, at this point in time, Daniel is now old. I mean, he's 80 at least. We got any 80-year-olds in the room? We got any? No. She's 8. Close? Not yet, So no offense, they don't come around very much. No, just kidding. So you better stick around with us, buddy. We're hoping for it. And so my point is that Daniel's getting old, right? He's old. We're not exactly sure why Daniel decides not to head back to his homeland. Many believe that it was because he was in a governmental official or governmental leadership role of some sort still. And because of that, he either was not privileged to leave or he chose to just stay where he was as he's in this nation that he's been in since he was a teenager, and he doesn't want to leave. And so at this point, Daniel's nearing the end of his life. He knows that. He has a final vision that shook him to his core. And although he didn't fully understand the vision, what he saw in this vision was massive chaos, massive conflict, massive battles and wars. And it really, really, really disturbed him. So much so that he goes into this 3-week period of time where he's mourning about this dream. And he's mourning to the point where he loses his appetite, where he's depressed. He's not really taking care of himself. He's not eating like he used to, drinking like he used to. He just can't function like he used to. Anybody ever hit a period of time in life, and many of us have, where you kind of get so anxious or sad or down, or you're lamenting, and it's just like, I'm not operating right? So that's where he's at this point. Now, 3 weeks after he has this vision, he's out strolling around with his entourage like a president would with his Secret Service. Think of it in those terms. So he's walking around by a river. He's got his posse with him. He looks up, and as he looks up, he sees this supernatural angelic being, and it scares him to the point where all of the energy in his body leaves him. He falls flat on his face. His friends cannot see necessarily what he's seeing, but something is there that begins to freak them out, and they can sense that something is wrong. And so they see Daniel on his face, flat out, paralyzed, and they leave him, which is not good Secret Service mentality, right? And so there's Daniel, paralyzed, unable to move, and then he feels this hand touch him, and somebody say, "Oh, Daniel, man greatly loved, stand up." And in Daniel chapter 10, starting in verse 10, it says, "A hand touched me," this is his journal, "and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said, 'Oh, Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words I speak and stand up, for I've been sent to you.' And when he spoke, I stood up trembling. 'Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand this vision and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I came because of your words. However,'" watch this, verse 13, "'the prince of the kingdom of Persia, though, withstood me 21 days. But Michael,'" God had to send Michael. What we'll learn is that Michael is an angel. These are angelic beings that existed. These is not like the son of the king of Persia. What we will see, that these are angelic beings that God released in the moment that Daniel humbled himself before God and began to pray. God released an answer immediately. He says, "The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes came to help me, for I was left there with the king of Persia. And he came to make you, and then I came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days. For the vision is for days yet to come. And so Daniel is freaked out about this vision. He's like, oh my gosh, this looks like it's going to be crazy. He begins to mourn, lament, pray. God sends this angelic being to bring understanding to him. He gets caught up for 21 days, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and to help him understand what this vision means. But the angel says, but listen, this isn't for your time period. This is for the later days, okay? In verse 19, he says, O man, greatly loved, speaking to Daniel, fear not, peace be with you, be strong and of good courage. And as he spoke to me, Daniel says, I was strengthened. And then verse 20 and 21, the angel has a funny moment, in my opinion. The moment goes kind of like this. The angel's like, hey, listen, I'll give you I'll tell you what the dream is. It's all of time is written out into this book, the book of truth. God's will is not going to be thwarted. I'll tell you what's going to happen. But here's the deal. It's got to be quick because I got to get back because I just got word that the prince of Greece is actually going to go and double team Michael and help out the king of Persia. And I got to get back into this war with y'all, with him. So I got to help. We got to do this quick. And Daniel's like, oh, okay. And so chapter 11 is basically the interpretation of this vision that Daniel had 3 weeks earlier that threw him into this massive state of anxiety. Now, I do not have time to go over all the details of the interpretation because there's been massive books written about it, and it would take volumes of books for you to understand it. But chapter 11 is considered to be one of the most profound pieces of ancient literature that the world has ever had. Hear me on this. What I'm going to explain to you is mind-blowing. Basically, the messenger angel spends 45 verses outlining the very specific details of the upcoming wars and battles that are going to take place in ancient Mesopotamia over the course of the next 200 years from Daniel's life. Okay? So Chuck Swindoll, who's many regard as one of the greatest Bible thinkers and teachers of our day, calls Daniel 11 the most remarkable chapter in the entire Bible. And it's not remarkable because of what it teaches. It's remarkable because of what it predicted in human history. Secular Mesopotamian historians would say, secular, this isn't like Christian people, they would say that in just the first 35 verses of chapter 11, there are at least 135 specific prophecies that had been literally fulfilled within the course of the next 200 years after it was written. That's insane. You don't seem impressed, but whatever. I don't have time to do a deep dive into all the specific details. Again, if you want to research that, you could do it on your own. But for 200 years, after this was written, after Daniel chapter 11 was written, it was used within ancient Mesopotamia, right, to warn leaders of their future, but nothing they could do to kind of thwart their future was able to thwart their future, and they couldn't stop what was being predicted from happening. That's nuts, okay? It is nuts. Now, it would be like living in D.C. in 1825, and I had fun writing this, so just bear with me. Imagine living in 1825 and finding a journal of a young man named Daniel, who you pick it up, and all of a sudden he starts talking about, I had a dream. I had a vision. And the vision started out with transportation system that I had never seen before, formed in the days that are going to be ahead, and it traveled the coast on rails with moving cars and wheels powered by hot rocks that breathed out smoke from their carts. And then in upcoming days beyond that, a new national leader would arise, and it would be the 16th national leader, and he will be elected, and he will be tall, and he will be bearded, and he will have an oversized stovepipe hat, and he will lead a nation into a civil battle. And the north will be against the south, and the south will be against the north, and the purpose will be for the freeing of the darker complexioned people who have been enslaved. And the north will prevail, and the leader of the north, though, will be killed. And another battle will arise in days that you're tracking with me? You're tracking, right? And another battle will arise in the days ahead, and this time a surprise attack on a small island off the western coast. Fire will fall from the heavens, and ships in the harbor will be destroyed. 2,400 lives will be lost. But a sleeping giant, however, will be awakened. And the giant will go to war with the world, and it will destroy 2 cities with 2 falling balls of fire. Oh. And in due time, 2 other birds will fly into 2 other identical towers. And these towers will be in a great city. And these towers will resemble silver and gold and platinum and turquoise. I don't know. And the towers will fall, and many will perish in that great city. But a new tower will emerge, a larger one this time, larger than the first, signifying freedom and strength. Like, you see this? It's imagery. But you know what I'm talking about. And then in the final hour, 2 elders will battle it out. And they will be elderly elders. And it will be an embarrassment to all. And they will debate. And they will debate their handicaps. And a course will be chosen. And their clubs will be picked. And the bags will be carried. And the flags will be positioned in their holes. One wearing red with the mind of a beast, another wearing blue with no mind at all. And a kingdom will be divided, yet God's kingdom will once again prevail. Like, thank you. And the point is, the point is imagine reading that. Imagine reading that in 1825. And it being preserved, and somebody handing it to you today, and you being like, no freaking way. Are you kidding me? Right? Imagine that. That is Daniel 11. But it's even more profound. It's crazy. Okay. And then, Daniel chapter 12 outlines what many call the end times, or the last days. In Daniel chapter 12, starting in verse 1, it says, at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince who has charge of your people. This is speaking of the latter days, even for us. This is the future. Michael is the angelical being that oversees Israel, God's people. Israel not necessarily as a nation, but Israel as a people, although there will be a lot that will go forth in, I believe, the nation of Israel. But however, nonetheless, Michael is the angelic being that is kind of the great warrior battling for God's people. The great prince who has charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, though, such as never has been seen since there was a nation. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awaken, and some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. But you, Daniel, verse 4, shut up the words and seal the book until the times of the end. And then Daniel sees 2 more angels and basically asks, okay, so it's going to be tough for everybody. How long is this going to end? And one of the angels actually answers them, but Daniel says in verse 8, he's like, I heard what he said, but I didn't understand it. You ever read the Bible or like come to church and you hear it and you're like, I don't understand. Yeah? Cool? Daniel had an angel tell him exactly what's going to happen, and Daniel's like, I didn't get it. No idea. No clue. Then he asks, what shall be the outcome of these things? And the angel kind of disregards the question and says, Daniel, go your way. In other words, dude, just go live your life. You let me worry about stuff I got to worry about. You worry about stuff you got to worry about. For the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly. But you, Daniel, go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of the days. And that is the book of Daniel. So, we've made it all the way through. I want to give you a few things that I could just pull out of this, these three fascinating chapters, and they're not that profound, to be honest. They're good reminders. The first one is this: God always responds to prayer. You need to hear that. It's so easy to forget that. God always responds to prayer, always. And isn't it true that sometimes we just wonder, like, does this even matter? Like, did my prayers even matter? It says the angelic messenger says in verse 12, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before God. When all of a sudden you went into lamenting and mourning because of this vision you had, and you began to pray, he says, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. This is true all throughout Scripture. As a matter of fact, many of us, we've been going through the one-year Bible together, and recently in the last week, we saw that when the Assyrians were about to take over and destroy Jerusalem, King Hezekiah began to pray for protection. And so God then sends Isaiah to tell King Hezekiah these specific words: because you have prayed to me against the king of Assyria, this is the word which the Lord has spoken concerning you, or concerning him. And then the prophet goes on to share the promise of God's deliverance of the city. The Bible is full of stories like this. Because you have prayed to me. Since the moment your words left your mouth, I heard and responded. I heard and responded. There is always a cause and effect nature to prayer. Always. I was reminded of that this week. We went, Will, who's over here, Will and I went to go and visit Tyler. Many of you know of Tyler. Tyler is the young man in our church. He's 13 years old. He has a genetic mutation. He's fighting for his life. He's been in the ICU for, at this point now, almost 20 days, or 20, maybe over 20 days now, for sure. And he's just been in a really, really bad spot. And so Will and I roll up. We come into Children's Hospital, and at some point in time, you know, we kneel down to pray. And I remember the second I started to pray and I knelt down, I struggled, because in my mind, I'm like, does this even work? But you see a young man, he's fighting for his life. We've been praying. And you ask, does this even work? And the Lord immediately reminded me of Daniel chapter 10. Does it work? Immediately when these words leave your mouth. Immediately. I hear and respond. Immediately. And we don't understand necessarily exactly how this invisible world exists and what it looks like and how it all works. How could we? We're finite beings. We're talking about the God of the universe who spoke into existence all of creation by simply a word. Right? But his promise is, and the scriptures see, because you have prayed to me. Hear me loud and clear. Everything that God sovereignly accomplishes on the planet today, he accomplishes through the prayers of his people. Somehow, God in his infinite wisdom has figured out a way, because he's God and we're not, how to sovereignly still maintain full control and accomplish fully his will solely through the prayers of his people. So when you kneel to pray, whatever it is that you need God to do or desire God to do in your life, just know that the moment those words come out of your mouth, he is responding. Now, second thing we see, there's always an attack against God's message being heard or delivered. In verse 13, the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the king of Persia and came to make you understand. So 21 days passes, right, from the time in which God hears Daniel plead for understanding and God's message is delivered to Daniel, but it takes 21 days. Why the delay? Why the delay? You ever ask the Lord, like, why the delay, Lord? You could have done this a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, 2 years, like, why the delay? Now, there's all sorts of reasons as why the delay. Maybe the Lord in his infinite wisdom was like, not now. Maybe the Lord is like, if I give that to you, it'll actually destroy you. Like, who knows exactly what it is? But we get one instance here where we can see one of the reasons why oftentimes things are delayed. And it's a weird answer. Like, if you ask the question, why didn't God's message get to Daniel immediately, and then you open up Daniel chapter 10, your only answer is, well, it's because it got intercepted by a spiritual warfare demonic being that slowed things down. Whoa. So Daniel has a vision. It freaks him out. He prays for understanding. God immediately sends a messenger to deliver that understanding to Daniel. There's a delay, and the holdup has to do with the prince of the kingdom of Persia. And these princes seem to be angelic beings that are designated to specific countries or nations or people. And in this chapter, we see that the prince of Persia is about to get kind of like support from the prince of Greece, which is, these are demonic beings that have been kicked out of heaven, right? When Satan kicked out, when Satan saw, when Jesus says he saw Satan kicked out of heaven like lightning, along with all of his demonic beings that got sent to the earth, there's been a war going on here. A war that we all feel, that we're all drawn into, that we all sense, but we can't really see it with our eyes. Michael is the angel that it's talked about in the book of Revelation. Michael is considered the prince of Israel. And so this angelic messenger is released immediately, right? Many people believe that it was Gabriel, another name or angel that you might have heard of because he's the messenger angel, right? But then Gabriel decides to make his way to Daniel through Persia, and then all of a sudden finds himself caught up in Persia, having to fight his way through and can't do it by himself. So the Lord's like, yo, Michael, go help him. Michael goes and helps him. Michael shows up and it is like, yo, I got this. I could take care of the Persia. I got this. Daniel then is able to hear the message because the angel finally gets to him. But the angel's like, yo, but I got to get back because, yo, Michael's about to get double teamed. And you and I are like, what is this? Now, I have no idea what this actually looks like. One day I'll get to see it just like you, right? It's going to be crazy, right? But here's what I do know is true. This is without question true. There are demonic spirits today that do not want people to hear the message that is sent from God. And I think that if the Lord allowed us to have eyes to see the demonic battles, the angelic battles, the supernatural wars that took place in order for you, just think about it, just you, for you to hear the gospel, for you to hear the message of Jesus, that he lived a life that you couldn't, died in your place for your sin, rose in victory over Satan, sin, and death, and rose and extends to you new life in Christ and gives you a new heart. It takes a heart of stone and gives you a heart of flesh and transforms you from the inside out, not the outside in. And he loves you unconditionally and he's for you, not against you. And because of what has been accomplished on the cross, you can have new life. And that cross bridges a dead man to a live man. And all of a sudden you're revived and resurrected into this new life. And you have all of that through the power and work of Jesus Christ. Like if you were to understand the battles that have been fought and won just so that you could hear that and believe it, it would blow your mind. I think it will blow your mind. Who can even imagine and fathom the attempts of cosmic battles and wars and demonic attacks that took place so that you would never be able to hear that? I remember becoming a Christian and putting my trust in Jesus. I was a freshman in college, and I didn't share this in any other services, but I'll share it here. But I remember being 17 years old, and I remember coming to this Christian campus, which, by the way, they're about to close. Hilarious. And so I come to this school, and a guy by the name of Chris Kaufman, who was my roommate. You know how you get assigned a roommate, you know? But nowadays, you could, like, go on Instagram and, like, oh, I like you. I don't like you. Let's get a new one. We couldn't do that. He just showed up, and they were like, this is your guy. You're like, oh, great. And so, but Chris was a believer, and I remember I wasn't a believer, wasn't ashamed of it. I was just confused. And I remember being at school for like 2 weeks, and I remember Chris telling me, yo, like my family and my church is praying for you. And I was like, what? I was offended. Praying for me for what? I'm good, dude. I'm good, right? Man, 2 weeks later, God wrecked me and gave me new life and changed my whole world. And as I was studying this week, I don't care if you clap. It's just like, if you're going to do it, commit. If you're not, then don't. I don't care. But my point is, like, as I was reading that this week, I was like, yo, I could envision a world where Chris literally got his church that was, I think, in like Ohio, right? To like pray for me. And I could imagine after reading this, that immediately the Lord had paved the path for Matt to hear the gospel. It just got caught up for a couple weeks. Okay. And that's why the message of the gospel never gets old for those who believe it. It never gets old. You're like, because I shouldn't know this. I shouldn't know this. I shouldn't believe this. It's like, as much as it doesn't make sense to you, it doesn't make sense to me. It's folly is what the scriptures would say to those who don't believe it. It doesn't make any sense. But to those who believe, it's everything. You're like, this is everything to me, right? Third thing I see in this, not only does the gospel never get old, but being reminded of God's great love never gets old. Look at verse 11. says, Daniel, oh Daniel, man greatly loved. Here's what's so interesting. No matter how old you are, or how long you've walked with the Lord, how faithful you've been, it's always good to be reminded of God's love for you. Let me help you understand. Here's Daniel. He's 80 years old, okay? You're almost 80. I love it. Love it. This is so good. Such a real-time illustration. What is true as you get older? Okay? Daniel has lived at this point. He's outlived most of his community. A lot of his best friends are gone. He knows he's not heading home to Israel. He knows he's going to die under the rule and reign of an enemy empire. He's not as strong as he once was. There's not much he can do to this point. And the truth is, the older you get, this is true. The older you get, the harder it is for you to feel like you're adding value and purpose to this world. This is just the way it is. It usually tends to start around 40. Hear me out. Just hear me out. Around 40, you start wondering, like, up until 40, you're like, I'm going to change the world. Like, And then you're like, did I do anything? And the older you get, the harder it is for you to feel like that you really believe that what you've done in life has made you greatly lovable. You've raised some kids, you've sent them out, you've kind of done your thing that you're going to do. And so here's Daniel. For 80 years, he tried to stay faithful to Jesus in a foreign land. And the truth is, the longer you live, hear me out, the more you're forced to be honest with yourself. And this is what's scary. And the more honest you are with yourself, the more self-aware you actually become. And the more self-aware you are, the more you start to question yourself. Like, why did you do that? Your motivations, your intentions, your own faithfulness. Not just what you did. You could look back, but like how much of the things that I did that were good were really about me more than anybody else. And that begins to happen in your life. Yet the first words that Daniel hears as a man who's late in life, who's probably wondering, like, did what I do matter? Like, did it matter at all? Is, oh, Daniel, man greatly loved. Like, it's hard to not get a little emotional knowing that. Here's a man who lived a long life of faithfulness. He's not perfect. We get 6 chapters of 80 years of life. And in those 6 chapters, he shares his highlights. Can I tell you what is true about Daniel too? He had a lot of lowlights too. Trust me. Nowhere in Scripture is man granted perfection other than Jesus. And isn't it true that Satan has a very unique way of sneaking into our thoughts and making us doubt his love? And how emotional it must have been for Daniel knowing his failures. And we always are reminded of our failures way more than we are reminded of our successes, right? It's always easier to believe that you're unloved than you are loved. How great it must have been for the first words to come out of this angelic being's mouth, who is a messenger of God. Oh, Daniel, a man greatly loved. Not only is he reminded that he's loved, but that loving touch, those words, strengthened him. Daniel 9, verse 19 in chapter 12, it says, and he spoke to me, I was strengthened. I was strengthened. God is not surprised by your weakness or your insecurities. He's not upset at your limitations. As the Creator God, he knows how difficult life is for you and what you can and cannot easily accomplish. And sometimes it's really hard to believe that you're greatly loved. But those words strengthened him. And sometimes those words come to us through those silent moments of solitude with the Lord. Sometimes it comes through prayer. Sometimes it comes through reading his word. Sometimes it comes through the preaching of his word. Sometimes it comes through a friend. Sometimes it will come to you through your spouse. But nonetheless, God's love has the unique ability, unlike any other ability, to hit us like a light switch that turns us from exhausted and discouraged to energized and joyful. No matter your age, no matter your background. And then he closes out and he promises Daniel something that we could all use. He promises him rest. Rest. Verse 8, Daniel asks, "Oh my Lord, what shall be the outcome of all of these things? This chaos, the craziness, the debates, the embarrassment, the wars, the stuff." He says, "Daniel, go your way." In other words, go live your life. Those words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of days. It's hard to imagine, but it is true that Daniel was just a normal man. I know it's hard. The only hero in the Bible is Jesus. Everybody else is kind of jacked up. David, he was a cheater, murderer. You're like, man after God's heart. Sure, yeah. There's a couple people on the planet that didn't think that about David. But he was. But Jesus truly is the hero. All the characters in Scripture who we look up to and love and adore, they all had their stuff. Daniel would be no different. Yes, Daniel was determined to not waste his life. Yes, Daniel loved God, but he loved him imperfectly, but he loved God. When it was clear for Daniel to do something and present an opportunity, he probably had a lot of successes to be fulfilling that opportunity well. He accomplished a lot of great things. And at the end of his life, though, he was tired. And most of his accomplishments weren't necessarily for him. They were for other people. And an angel comes and says to him, "Rest is coming." And in other words, though, what is being communicated to Daniel is death is around the corner. But death will not keep you. He says, "You shall also stand. Resurrected life is at hand." And that same thing is true for us. Scripture teaches that all of us will experience a final wake up. Okay, hear me. And when we wake up in our resurrection, in that moment, who we're with and what we experience are entirely based on now. If we in this life choose to experience and receive the free gift of salvation that only Christ offers, then when we rise in our resurrection, which we all will, we will be with Jesus like we are with him now, except so much more with him in all of his glory, in our perfection in his, and we will wake up to the greatest day ever. And if we choose to ignore Jesus or reject Jesus, in our resurrection, we will still wake up, and we will wake up without Jesus, who's the author and perfecter of our faith, but he's also the author of all life. And so life on the other side without Jesus is no life at all. But you will still be conscious and aware. And there will be guilt and regret and a clear understanding that whatever you are receiving in that moment is just because of our rebellion against our Creator. Hebrews 9 says it like this: "It is appointed for men to die once, but after this is judgment." Put your trust in Jesus today. It's the greatest thing you'll ever do today, and it's the greatest thing you can ever do for tomorrow. And so that's why this angel can look at Daniel and say, a day's coming where you'll rest, but you will rise. It's going to be great because you're greatly loved.